The first time my neighbor called the cops on my backyard grill, I actually laughed because I thought there was no way a grown woman would look a police officer in the eye and say ribs were a public emergency. The second time, my wife stopped laughing, and by the third time there was red liquid dripping off my smoker, a dozen guests frozen on my patio with paper plates in their hands, and me standing there thinking, all of this started because I wanted to be friendly. My name is Grant Miller, and up until last spring, I honestly believed the easiest way to make peace with new neighbors was food. Not speeches, not little welcome cards, not pretending you care about mailbox placement at a neighborhood meeting, just food hot off the grill, something smoky and simple that gives people a reason to stand around and talk. I grew up in Kansas, in the kind of house where the garage always smelled like charcoal lighter fluid and cut grass, where my dad treated Saturday barbecue like church and my mum could make potato salad that would make relatives who hated each other sit at the same table and act Civ Part 2-ized for 20 minutes. So when my wife Lauren and I bought our first real house in a quiet little subdivision outside Louisville, a place called Briarwood Hollow, with maple trees on every street and porches just close enough for people to wave without actually getting involved, I thought, this is it. This is where we become the nice couple on the corner. The house had a fenced backyard, a brick patio, and just enough space for the offset smoker I had been saving up for since before we got married. I bought that smoker like some men buy sports cars. I researched it, measured the patio twice, watched videos, seasoned the grates, bought hickory wood, and spent one embarrassing Friday night standing in the yard with a flashlight just admiring it. Lauren teased me about it, of course. She said I looked at that thing with more tenderness than I looked at our wedding china, and she was not entirely wrong. So that first weekend, after most of the boxes were unpacked, I told her we should invite the neighbors over, nothing fancy. Burgers, chicken thighs, grilled corn, maybe some peach cobbler if I could talk her into making it. Lauren liked the idea. She said it would help us put faces to names, and she was right, because until then, everyone had been a passing blur of lawnmowers, recycling bins, and golden retrievers. Around 5 that Saturday, people started drifting over. The older couple from across the street brought lemonade. The guy 2 doors down brought a cooler of beer. A young mum came with 2 little boys who immediately treated our yard like a public park. And for about half an hour, they sex. It felt exactly like what I had imagined when we signed the mortgage papers. There was music playing low, sun coming through the trees, smoke curling up in that slow blue ribbon that makes you hungry before you even know what is cooking, and I remember thinking, maybe adulthood does have a few decent perks. Then Denise called her, walked through our gate. I had seen her once before, walking a white dog in a little green vest, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying herself like someone who had been personally disappointed by the entire human race. She was probably in her late 40s, stylish in a severe kind of way, hair cut sharp at the jaw, linen pants, expensive sandals, one of those reusable water bottles covered in activist stickers. She did not smile when Lauren introduced herself. She just looked past my wife straight at the grill, and her face tightened like she had smelled smoke from a house fire. I was turning chicken at the time, trying not to burn the skin, and I gave her my best neighborly smile. "Hey," I said, "glad you could make it. We have burgers, chicken, corn, and I made a few black bean patties too, just in case anybody does not eat meat." I said that last part because I was trying to be considerate, because my younger sister is vegetarian, and I know how awkward cookouts can be when people act like eating differently is some kind of personal insult. Denise blinked at me, then looked at the platter of marinated chicken like I had set a crime scene on the table. "You grill animal bodies in an open residential area," she said. Not a question, just a verdict. The yard went quieter in that way people do when they pretend not to hear something but absolutely hear every word. I gave a small laugh because I thought maybe she had a dry sense of humor. "Well," I said, I grill dinner mostly, but like I said, we do have black bean burgers." She did not move toward the food. She stepped closer to the patio, pointed one manicured finger at the smoker, and said, "Do you know how much suffering is represented in that smoke?" And I remember looking at Lauren, then at the beer cooler, then back at Denise, thinking surely this is just one of those awkward first meeting moments people joke about later. I told her I respected her views, I really did, and that she was welcome to anything on the table that fit her diet. But Denise gave me this tight little smile and said, respect would mean not forcing the smell of death over my fence. Now, I want to be fair here, because I learned later that Denise had reasons for being the way she was. Not good reasons, not excuses, but reasons. She had moved into Briarwood Hollow after a nasty divorce. She had apparently reinvented herself through wellness groups and animal rescue circles, and she had become the unofficial captain of what she called a Clean Living Neighborhood Initiative, which sounded official until he realized it was mostly a Facebook group with 7 members and a logo she designed herself. She believed the subdivision needed standards: no loud trucks, no chemical lawn sprays, no outdoor burning, no visible trash cans, no meat smoke, and most importantly, no one telling her no. At the time, though, all I knew was that she had been in my yard for 4 minutes and had already made my guests stare into their cups like they were witnessing a family argument. Lauren, bless her, tried to smooth it over. "Denise," she said gently, "we're happy to move the meat farther from the fence next time, if the smoke bothers you." Denise turned to her like a school principal, catching a child cheating. "Next time," she said, "there should not be a next time." That was when my neighbor Pete, who had already had 1 beer and had the kind of mouth that enjoyed finding trouble, muttered, "Lady, it is a barbecue, not a felony." A couple people laughed, not loudly, but enough. Denise heard it. Her cheeks flushed, her jaw set, and she looked at me as if I had organized a public humiliation instead of a cookout. She said, "You will regret treating this like a joke, Mr. Miller." Then she turned, walked out through the gate, and left it swinging open behind her. For the rest of the evening, people tried to pretend the mood had not changed. But of course it had. Someone made a joke about hiding the hot dogs. Pete asked if he should eat his burger in witness protection, and Lauren kept giving me that look wives give when they are already calculating future problems. I told her it was fine, that Denise was probably just intense, that every neighborhood had one person who treated the place like their personal kingdom. I even said, and I remember this because it became painfully stupid later, as long as we stay polite, she will get bored. The next Saturday proved me wrong. I was out back around 6. Just me and the smoker, no party, no music, no crowd, just a rack of ribs. I'd been baying all afternoon and 2 chicken breasts for Lauren, because she pretended she did not care about barbecue and then somehow ate half of mine every time. The air was warm. The sky was turning that soft gold color, and I was brushing sauce over the ribs when Denise's side gate slammed so hard I jumped. She came into my yard without knocking, without calling over the fence, without even pretending she had permission, holding her phone up like a weapon. I wiped my hands on a towel and said, "Denise, you cannot just come into my backyard." She said, "I can when you are creating a public nuisance." I looked at the smoker, then at her phone and felt this weird little pulse in my neck. A public nuisance. She lifted her chin. "I am calling the police." I thought she was bluffing, so I said for rids. Her eyes narrowed, for illegal outdoor smoke, animal cruelty, and harassment by odor. Now I just stared at her, because there are moments in life when language fails, and apparently harassment by odor was one of them. She tapped her screen, put the phone to her ear, and in the calmest voice imaginable, told dispatch that her neighbor was violating community safety standards by cooking dead animals in a way that was emotionally distressing and possibly toxic. I wanted to grab the phone and explain that community safety standards were not laws, and that emotionally distressing ribs sounded like something from a sketch comedy show, but instead I just stood there with a sauce brush in my hand, because some part of me already understood that if I raised my voice even once, Denise would make herself the victim before the smoke cleared. Lauren came outside halfway through the call, took one look at Denise and whispered, "Please tell me this is not happening." 15 minutes later, a patrol car rolled slowly up to the curb, and the whole street seemed to notice at once. Curtains moved. A garage door stopped halfway down. Pete appeared on his porch like he had been summoned by the scent of drama. The officer who walked into my backyard was a younger guy, maybe early 30s, polite but visibly confused, and he looked from Denise to me to the ribs like he was waiting for somebody to admit this was a prank. Denise spoke first. "Officer, this man is filling my property with smoke from murdered animals after I made it clear that it violates my boundaries." The officer took a slow breath, the kind men take when they realize the paperwork will be ridiculous, and asked me if I had a permit issue, a fire pit, anything like that. I told him no, sir, just a smoker, kept away from the fence, no open flame beyond normal cooking, and I pointed to the garden hose I always kept nearby because my dad had raised me right. The officer checked the setup, nodded, and said, "Mom, cooking food on private property is legal." Denise went still. "Legal does not mean ethical," she snapped. "No," the officer said, "but my job is legal." And that should have been the end of it. It really should have been. But as Denise stood there, humiliated in my backyard while Pete watched from across the street and Lauren folded her arms beside me, I saw something shift in her face. It was not embarrassment, not exactly. It was ownership being challenged. It was the look of someone who had built her identity around being obeyed, suddenly realizing the law did not belong to her. She left without another word, but before she stepped through the gate, she looked back at my smoker and said quietly, "This neighborhood will not be your smokehouse." And for the first time, I did not laugh, because the way she said it made me believe she was not done. The next morning, I woke up to a folded piece of paper taped to our front door, not placed in the mailbox, not slid under the mat, taped right at eye level like some kind of suburban arrest warrant, and across the top in bold letters it said "Notice of Neighborhood Concern." I remember standing there in my socks, coffee in one hand, reading this 3-page document Denise had typed up about smoke intrusion, emotional distress, public decency, and the preservation of Briarwood Hollow's wellness values, which was funny because I had lived there for maybe 3 weeks, and the only values I had noticed so far were people not returning borrowed ladders and pretending not to see each other take garbage cans out too early. Lauren came up behind me, rested her chin on my shoulder, and after about 10 seconds she said, "Grant, this woman has too much printer ink and not enough hobbies." I wanted to laugh, but the truth was the letter bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Not because she had a legal leg to stand on. She did not, but because there is something weirdly invasive about someone trying to rewrite your normal life into a moral crime. I was not blasting music at midnight. I was not dumping grease into her flower beds. I was not standing on the fence waving pork ribs at her windows. I was cooking dinner in my yard, and somehow she had managed to make it feel like I was the one causing trouble. By Monday evening, the neighborhood Facebook group had turned into a courtroom run by people who used blurry sunset photos as profile pictures. Denise posted a long message about toxic meat smoke drifting into homes where children and rescue animals lived. And she never used my name, but she described our house as the beige colonial near the south entrance with the oversized smoker, which was about as anonymous as putting my driver's license in the caption. Most people ignored it, a few gave her little praying hands and leaf emojis, and then Pete, because Pete was physically incapable of choosing peace, commented, "I survived the brisket fumes and would like to testify that they were delicious." That set her off. She replied with links to articles about air quality, animal agriculture, neighborhood nuisance complaints, and one blog post from a woman in Oregon who claimed a neighbor's barbecue had ruined her spiritual alignment. By the time I got home from work, Lauren was sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open, reading comments with the same expression she had when watching true crime documentaries. She looked up and said, "She is building a case against your ribs." I said, "Let her build whatever she wants. I'm not doing anything wrong." But even as I said it, I felt that small, hard knot in my stomach, because people like Denise do not always need to be right. They just need to be relentless enough to make being right exhausting, to make being right exhausting. Over the next 2 weeks, she became relentless. She called the city code office twice, and a board inspector came out, walked around our backyard, confirmed the smoker was legal, and actually complimented the way I had set it out away from the fence line. Denise watched from a side porch with her arms crossed, and when the inspector left, she called after him, "So you are just allowing this?" He did not even turn around. Then she started leaving little laminated flyers on porches, inviting neighbors to a clean air discussion circle at her house, which from what I heard drew exactly 3 people, one of whom was Pete's teenage daughter because she thought there would be snacks. She also started timing me. I'm not kidding. If I lit the smoker at noon, she would appear at her upstairs window with her phone. If I opened the lid, she would record. If I walked across the yard carrying a tray, she would stare like she was documenting a war crime. At first, I tried to be polite about it. I moved the smoker even farther from her fence. I texted in the neighborhood group before cooking, saying, "Just a heads up, grilling from 4 to 7 tonight, keeping smoke low, appreciate everyone's patience." I bought a better chimney cap. I even cooked with lump charcoal one weekend because someone told me it smoked less, and all it did was make me spend more money to feel like a guest in my own home. Lauren finally called me out on it one night after I caught myself saying, "Maybe we should just grill less for a while." She turned away from the sink, hands wet, dish towel over one shoulder, and said, "No, just no." I said, "I am trying not to make this bigger." She said, "It is already bigger, but not because of you." Then she softened a little, walked over and touched my arm. "Grant," she said, "you are shrinking yourself so a woman who breaks into our yard can feel powerful." That landed harder than any of Denise's letters. Because Lauren was right. I had been acting like calm meant surrendering 1 inch at a time. I had been raised to be reasonable, to not make a scene, to find the middle ground. But there is no middle ground with someone who believes your existence is an attack. So I stopped negotiating with ghosts. I printed the city ordinances about residential grilling. I saved the inspector's email confirming everything was legal. I installed 2 more security cameras, one facing the back gate and one angled toward the patio. Not hidden, not dramatic, just obvious enough that anyone stepping into our yard would know they were being recorded. I put a small, polite sign on the gate that said, "Private property. Please do not enter without permission." And then I did something Denise apparently never expected. I planned the barbecue. Not a quiet one, not a secret one, a real one. Lauren's birthday was coming up, and she had been so stressed from the whole mess that I wanted to do something normal again, something warm and loud and ours. She resisted at first, not because she was scared, but because she did not want her birthday turned into a neighborhood incident report. But I told her that was exactly why we needed to do it. I said, "We are not throwing this to spite Denise. We are throwing it because this is our home, and you deserve one evening that does not revolve around her." Lauren looked at me for a long moment, then smiled in that tired way people do when they decide to be brave before they feel brave. "Fine," she said, but as she shows up with another manifesto, I am eating cake while she reads it. We invited maybe 20 people, close friends, a few neighbors who had been kind, and yes, Pete, because by then he had become the unofficial town crier of our little war. I kept everything above board. I told the closest neighbors the date and time. I made sure the smoker was clean. I even made a whole tray of grilled vegetable skewers and black bean sliders. Not for Denise, not really, but because I still believed being considerate was not the same as being weak. The day of the party, the weather was perfect in a way that felt almost suspicious. Bright but not hot, a soft breeze pushing smoke away from Denise's house, late afternoon sun turning the fence honey-colored. Lauren wore a blue summer dress, our friends brought folding chairs and too much wine. Pete set up a cornhole board near the maple tree, and for the first hour I almost forgot about Denise. Almost. Then around 6:30, while I was slicing brisket on a wooden board and Lauren was laughing at something near the patio table, I saw movement at the side gate. Not a knock, not a voice. Just the latch lifting. My first thought was, she would not. My second thought was, of course she would. Denise stepped into the yard wearing white, which felt theatrical even before I noticed what she was holding. In one hand, she had a poster board with "Stop the Smoke" written across it in thick black marker. In the other, she had a metal canister with a red lid. Behind her were 2 women I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood group, both looking nervous in the way people look when they joined a protest online and then realized real life has consequences. The music seemed to fade without anyone touching it. Conversations stopped. Even the kids near the cornhole board went still. Denise walked straight toward the smoker, eyes locked on me, face pale with fury and purpose. I said her name once, low and clear. "Denise, leave my property." She did not stop. She raised the poster like a shield and said, "Not until everyone here understands what they are celebrating." Lauren moved beside me, and I felt her hand find my wrist, not to hold me back exactly, but to remind me that cameras were rolling, that witnesses were watching, that this was the moment Denise had been trying to drag me into for weeks. I kept my voice steady. "You are trespassing. You need to leave now." Denise laughed, sharp and humorless, and said, "Trespassing is what your smoke does every weekend." Pete muttered from somewhere behind me, "That does not even mean anything," but nobody laughed this time. Denise stepped around me toward the smoker, twisted the lid off the canister, and that was when I smelled it. Not blood, not real blood, but something sour and metallic and fake, the kind of stage prop smell that hits your nose before your brain catches up. Lauren whispered, "Oh my God." Denise lifted the canister over the smoker, and for one suspended second, everything in that yard held still. The sunlight, the smoke, the faces, my own breath, and then she poured red liquid across the lid, down the front, over the side table, splashing it onto the tray of brisket and the clean white towel beside it. People gasped. One of the kids started crying. My first instinct was pure anger, hot and animal, the kind that makes your hands move before your mind gives permission. but I did not touch her. I stepped back, pointed at the camera above the porch and said, "Denise, you just destroyed my property on video." She looked at the camera, and for the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered across her face. Not fear yet, just the beginning of realization. Then Lauren, calm as ice, pulled out her phone and said, "I'm calling the police." Lauren did not yell when she called 911, and somehow that made the whole thing feel even more serious. Because while Denise was standing there with red liquid on hands, like she had just performed some kind of neighborhood exorcism, my wife was giving our address in a voice so calm it could have cut glass. I kept my eyes on Denise, not because I wanted to intimidate her, but because I knew if she moved toward Lauren or the guests, everything could get worse in half a second. Denise's two little protest friends had backed up toward the gate by then, and one of them, a woman named Marcy, who lived near the cul-de-sac, kept whispering, "Denise, this is too much, Denise, we should go." But Denise just stood there breathing hard, staring at the smoker like she had finally slain the dragon. The funny thing, if there is anything funny about watching your wife's birthday party turn into evidence, was that nobody knew what to do with their hands. People held paper plates they no longer wanted to eat from. Pete had one cornhole bag still in his fist, frozen mid-game. A little boy clung to his mother's leg, crying into her dress, and that was the part that snapped something into focus for me. Denise had spent weeks pretending this was about compassion, about safety, about protecting the innocent, and now there was an actual child scared in my backyard because she could not stand the idea of someone telling her no. I said quietly, "You need to wait by the gate until the police arrive." Denise turned to me with this cold, triumphant look and said, "Good, let them come. Let them see what you people are." I almost answered that Lauren gave me one look, just one, and I swallowed it. That is marriage right there, by the way. Not the romantic stuff people post online, but the look that keeps you from becoming Exhibit B in your own police report. The officers arrived faster than I expected, probably because dispatch had heard the words trespassing, property damage, and active disturbance. And this time it was not the young officer from before. It was two officers, one older woman with grey at her temples, and a younger man who clearly recognized our address from the earlier call because the second he stepped through the gate, his face did this tiny flicker like, "Oh, this house again." Denise immediately launched into her speech. She said we were hosting a ritualized celebration of animal death, that the neighborhood had been under assault for weeks, that she had tried peaceful remedies and been ignored, that sometimes civil disobedience required bold action. The older officer let her talk for maybe 30 seconds, then held up one hand and said, "Mom, did you enter this property after being asked not to?" Denise blinked. "That is not the issue." The officer said, "It is one of the issues. Did you pour that substance on his grill and food?" Denise lifted her chin. "It is symbolic." Pete, from behind me, muttered, "It is also on the brisket," and I swear half the yard wanted to laugh, but nobody dared. The officer asked me if we had cameras, and I said, "Yes, Mom, 2 of them, both active, both capturing the gate and patio." Denise's face changed then. That little crack of uncertainty from before whitened into something closer to fear. She turned toward Marcy and the other woman, as if looking for backup, but Marcy just said, "I did not know she was going to pour anything, I swear. I thought we were just coming to talk." That was the moment Denise realized she was alone. Not morally alone, because people like her never believe that, but practically alone. And that is the kind that matters when police are writing things down. Lauren pulled up the camera feed on her phone, and we watched it right there under the string lights. All of us gathered around this tiny screen while the ruined smoker cooled behind us. There was Denise opening the gate. There was me telling her to leave. There was her walking past me anyway. There was the red liquid going everywhere. No dramatic music, no political argument, no grey area, just a woman trespassing into someone's yard and destroying food and equipment while guests watched. The older officer looked at Denise and said, "Turn around, please." Denise actually laughed once, a short, stunned sound, like the universe had made a clerical error. "You cannot be serious," she said. "I am the one being harmed." The officer said, "Mom, turn around." And there it was, the most satisfying sound I have ever heard at a barbecue. Not the sizzle of fat hitting coals, not the pop of a beer cap, but the soft click of handcuffs on a woman who had mistaken obsession for righteousness. She did not go quietly, of course. She cried. She shouted that she was being silenced. She told the officers they were protecting murder. She told Lauren she would regret siding with me, which was a strange thing to say to my wife in our own backyard, but Denise had long since left the county of reasonable thought. As they walked her out, she passed the porch camera and looked straight into it, mascara starting to run, red stains on her white sleeves, and for a second she looked less like a villain and more like someone who had built a cage out of her own anger and only just realized she was inside it. I did not feel sorry for her exactly, but I did feel the weird heaviness that comes when a ridiculous situation finally becomes sad. After the police left, nobody knew whether the party was over. The smoker was ruined for the night, the brisket was trash, the patio smelled like vinegar and theatrical blood, and Lauren's birthday candles were still sitting untouched on the kitchen counter. Then Pete disappeared through the gate and came back 10 minutes later carrying 2 giant trays of fried chicken from the grocery store like a man returning from battle. He set them on the table and said, "I know this is not barbecue, but it is technically bird, so Denise would hate it." And that was it. The spell broke. People laughed, softly at first, then really laughed, the kind of laugh that comes after everyone has been holding their breath too long. Lauren hugged me in the middle of the patio and whispered, "Next year, we're going out for dinner." I told her absolutely, and neither of us meant it. The legal part took a while because legal things always do. Denise was charged with trespassing and destruction of property, and because we had video, witnesses, the previous police call, and the city inspector's email, there was not much room for her to spin it into a noble protest. She paid for the damaged smoker, the wasted food, and the cleaning, and Lauren and I got a protective order that made it very clear she was not to enter our property, contact us, or organize any more little moral crusades in our gate. The neighborhood Facebook group went silent for about 2 days, which in suburban terms is basically a national day of mourning. And then someone posted asking whether anybody had a good recipe for smoked ribs. I did not comment, but Pete tagged me anyway. Denise still lived next door for several months, and those months were strange. She avoided us mostly. Sometimes I would see her through the fence, watering plants with stiff, angry movements. I wondered whether she still believed she had been right. Maybe she did. People rarely give up a story where they are the hero. But after that night, the power shifted. She could glare. She could post vague quotes about cruelty and awakening. She could slam her windows when I cooked, but she could not step into my yard anymore, and that mattered. By fall, she put the house up for sale. The day the moving truck came, I did not celebrate, not openly. I just stood on my patio with a cup of coffee and watched the last box go in. And when the truck pulled away, Briarwood Hollow felt lighter, like the whole street had finally exhaled. The next spring, Lauren surprised me with a new smoker, better than the old one, with a little brass plate on the side that said "Property of the Smokehouse." We hosted another cookout, smaller this time, just friends and the neighbors who had stuck by us. And as the sun went down and the smoke drifted up into the soft evening air, I thought about how easy it is for people to dress control up as conviction. Denise was not wrong because she cared about animals. She was wrong because she decided caring gave her permission to invade, shame, threaten, and destroy. And maybe that is where the argument really is. Was I petty for continuing to grill after I knew it bothered her? Was she standing up for her beliefs, or just using beliefs as a weapon because she could not control her own life? I know what I think, but I want to hear what you think. If you were in my shoes, would you have stopped grilling to keep the peace, or would you have fired up that smoker every single weekend just to prove your backyard still belonged to you? Drop your take in the comments, tell me who was right, who went too far, and whether justice was actually served here. And if you have ever dealt with a neighbor who thought the whole street revolved around them, share that story too, because after Denise, I believe every neighborhood has at least one person who can turn dinner into a crime scene.